So go ahead and open up the Sedan 66 photograph that you should have there in your folder. And you should see a black and white photograph of a sedan and a teepee there behind it. The purpose of this exercise is to show you how to take a black and white photograph and add color to it. And generally speaking, the reason you want to do this is to create a sense of nostalgia, because the kind of color look that you're going to get when you do this is going to be similar to what you might see in a vintage postcard or perhaps an old color film from the 1930s. It has a very technicolor kind of look to it, a very vintage color kind of look to it, kind of color going back to the early days of color film. And the reason is basically based upon technology and what you can get from a black and white photograph and turning it into color. It's not going to be the same process or the same kind of color you'd expect to see from your digital camera or from color film that we would shoot nowadays. But in this case, it will explain to you how you can use color elements with black and white, which I think can be useful at times, and also it'll explain a couple technical things in Photoshop that you might be able to use in the future. It's a fairly quick exercise and won't take us long to do this, but in other words, it's easy to learn. The steps are very simple, although the mechanics take quite a long time because there's a lot of selecting involved. Alright, so beginning with our flat image here, the first thing you need to do in coloring a photograph is to figure out how you're going to go about doing it. In other words, if you are dealing with an image like this that has very distinct areas to separate, it'll be probably pretty simple and straightforward in terms of figuring out where your selections are going to go. But say, for example, certain areas are maybe not so simple, like the sedan itself, where you've got chrome, and you've got tail lights, and you've got hubcaps, and you've got the roof and the glass elements. All of these things combined can be kind of tricky. And when you start getting into tight areas, tight spaces like this, where you've got a lot of colors on top of each other, a lot of elements and areas close by, selecting can really help you in terms of painting the photograph, which is essentially what we're doing here. We're basically taking different layers and assigning each layer to a particular color, and then using those colors piece by piece to put the puzzle together and get a full color image out of the process. So if we start with the teepee, which is a pretty easy shape to select, there are lots of different ways you can select it, of course, and I don't need to do a full review of all the selection methods that we covered earlier in the course, but please use any selection methods you feel comfortable with. So if you're really a big fan of the new quick selection tool, then go for it. If you prefer some of the more old school selection tools like the lasso or the polygonal lasso or magnetic lasso, by all means use the one you're most comfortable with, and that would include, of course, the pen tools, any of those. If you prefer doing things vector first and then converting that into a selection, by all means. Or even if you just want to use the paint brushes and use the quick mask mode and just start using your paint tools to go ahead and paint the areas, that's a good way to go as well. Basically what we're doing is we're making sure that every color goes onto a separate layer. So we're going to add a brand new layer, and we'll call this one, let's go yellow with this, and we'll use this for our teepee. Now the reason selecting is involved is because, if I zoom in here a bit, when I'm painting yellow, it's very easy for me to just grab a paintbrush and just start painting yellow. Of course, I can do that and create the paint over the teepee area. But, well, I should use a soft edge brush. I should probably use something harder. But even so, you can see right away, even with a hard edge brush, it's going to be very difficult to sort of adhere to that line and keep it perfect. You're always going to make mistakes. Going back to when we were kids coloring in a coloring book, it's never easy to stay between the lines. So selections can go a long way towards helping that process, and so that's what we're going to do first. Create a selection, and I'll just go ahead and throw this away, just rid of all this paint. By the way, I just took the selection tool and hit the delete key to do that, if you're wondering. All right, so if I go back and choose a selection tool, let's try, for example, the quick selection tool. If you've got CS3 or above, go ahead and just start painting with that. If you don't have CS3 or above, that's fine. Just go ahead and use any selection tool you've got there. Again, even if you have CS3 and you're not real comfortable with this tool, or you have others you like, definitely go ahead and join in with those. And just trying to get a selection. You can see here, ooh, I forgot a key ingredient here. I didn't put sample all layers on. So let's go back and try that again. That's better. All right. And to subtract from a selection with all the selection tools, the keyboard shortcut should be your Option or Alt key on your keyboard. And you can add or subtract as needed to your selection. All right, now we want to subtract this area here because I don't want to include the dark portions. And sometimes you're going to find that your initial selection tool doesn't get the job done. And if that happens, don't panic, don't worry, just switch selection tools, mix and match, get the ones that you think would be best for that particular job, fine tuning it. And say, for example, if you need a freehand assistance, get your mouse in there and just get some freehand drawing involved. Clean that up. And I'm going to come over here, cutting across the middle there because it kind of looks like a shadow to me. Now I'm adding to my selection. Piece by piece. And sometimes when you get into those tight spaces or tricky corners, you may want to jump over to one of your more familiar selection tools and let the more automated selection tool go by. It may not be the best tool for you to choose in that situation, but when you get into these simpler areas, you can see it's doing a pretty good job grabbing that TP there. Now areas here, it's going to be tricky because you can see in this black and white photo that the TP and the sky look almost like the same exact shade, so it's not going to work well at all in those situations. And that's a time where you're probably going to want to jump ship once again back to one of those older selection tools, maybe the polygonal lasso this time, and just hold down that shift key to add to your selection and just draw some nice straight lines and get that all added the way it should be. But of course everyone's using different selection tools, so I'm not going to continue on with this because you're going to choose the selection tool that works for you and you know how to do that. So let me go to the next step, and that is of course saving the selection. I think hopefully you all remember how to do this from your selection tutorial, but when you're ready to save your selections, that's under the select menu. Just choose save selection and you give it a name here and it will save it out to your channels. Now I've already given you a head start on a few of these items. If you go to channels, you'll see that I've given you the TP, the car roof, and the sedan. Alright, so you've got several elements there that you can sort of get a jump start on just by loading those selections up. So I'm going to hit my command key for a shortcut and click on that TP selection, and you can see there's the TP loaded up. In this case I included the top part as well as the lines going down the middle, but you can do your own version of that if you'd prefer. You can also do this process. I use the shortcut by command clicking or Apple clicking there on the channel itself, but you could also do that by going to the select menu and choose load selection and then find that particular channel, TP or car roof or whatever, and just choose to load that up. I'm just gonna go back, there we go. And for the other elements, such as the chrome bumpers, the wheels, the ground, the grass back there, just make your own selections as you go. Just remember to keep every color on a separate layer as you paint. Now here's the deal. Once we've got the selection made, let's go back to our yellow layer. And that's where the easy part comes. I can just go ahead and fill that in, just completely solid. And nice big brush here. Once the selection's made, if I did a good job, I shouldn't have to worry too much about the edges. Alright, once that's done, here's the trick. You go to your layer and then go to your blend mode and change it to color, which is at the very bottom almost of that blend mode's pop-up list. Choose color. What that does basically, it preserves the hue of that layer while keeping the value from below. So it's taking the value information from the layer below it because it's blending the two, but it's preserving only the color. That's why it's called the color blend mode. So it will preserve the color information from late yellow, which it did, but it combines the value information of the color with the value it receives from the black and white photo. Hence, you get that colorized look. Now, even so, it's still a little bit overbearing for me. So what I might consider doing in this case would be using my blend opacity here and just taking down that yellow until I get it like kind of a happy medium there between the value information from the background and the color information on top. And you're going to have to use your own judgment on this, most of these, as you go through, as you would with your regular photograph as well. You have to sort of see what works to you in terms of how much color is too much and what kind of balance you need to strike between these different regions of the photograph in terms of putting your color out there. And that's basically the process. So you'll continue on with this, selecting the sky, and you could take advantage of, don't forget to take advantage of your inverse selection tool. You know, that can be a big help in situations like that where you can sort of flip the selection inside out. And then, you know, you might start to use your existing selections to help make your following selections. In other words, your selections as you go along, take advantage of the stuff you've already selected. So for example, if I'm building a selection of the sky, I can go to select inverse, and boom, I've got a head start already. Zoom out here on selecting that sky element. You know, it's not perfect yet, but I could subtract, you know, certainly the trees and the roof here, and I'd have this sky pretty much perfectly ready to go and ready to paint. But as I said, make sure every color is on a different layer, because that makes life a lot easier for you if you need to make changes or corrections. So, you know, blue for the sky, etc., etc. And you can choose whatever colors you want for the exercise. It's really up to you. And when you finish, it's going to look something like this, although you don't have to choose the same colors I chose. This is the finished result. And basically, as you can see, you get a nice vintage, nostalgic, kind of old-fashioned postcard look to it. And I've actually got a collection of some old postcards going back all the way to, you know, the early 1900s, 1903, 1910, or 1910, 1909, 1910. And they actually look very much like this. It's surprising, you know. And if you look at Technicolor movies from the 30s, that didn't come in till the 1930s. But if you look at like films like Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz, movies that are classics that are still around that were shot in that era, they have very, very brilliant colors, but the colors don't look the way they might if, you know, from a contemporary film. And to invoke that look is often advantageous to what you're doing. So at any rate, when you finish painting and you've got it all ready, go ahead and save your file out as it is, as you saw the completed version there, and then add it to the rest of your modules. But go ahead and just call it Sedan 66 and save that out as a finished version. If you'd like to save your channels as well, that's fine. I don't have to see all of your selections, but you know, any selection that you save, just go ahead and leave it there when you save your file out, and leave the layers, of course, intact so I can see all those. But that's about it. We'll see you in the next tutorial.